If you'd like, you can open your Bibles up to Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23. So we have the very difficult task of trying to harmonize all of the details of the account of Jesus' trial and crucifixion. And the reason I say that's difficult is not because they conflict in any way, but because Matthew may give one detail, Mark may give another detail, Luke a different detail, and they are not as concerned with the chronology of it as what we're trying to do is we just tell it as a story. So Dwight and I are doing our best to plug in every detail from all four accounts where it goes. The problem is it's easy to get confused when doing that and skip some. And so don't be surprised if we accidentally skip some. And if we do, call it to our attention. If you see where, I think this is supposed to plug in here and we missed it. But we will do our best in doing that. So Jesus has been arrested. He has gone through kind of a mock trial with the Jews that night and then brought before the Sanhedrin early Friday morning. And then the Sanhedrin condemns him to death. Why don't they just put him to death? They're under Roman law, and so they can't do that without Roman authority to do so or permission to do so. So they bring Jesus to Pilate, and they make the accusation about Jesus that, well, he's stirring up the people. Number two, that he commanded not to pay taxes, which was a bold-faced lie. And number three, that he claims to be a king of the Jews. Now that one catches Pilate's attention because his whole job, the reason Caesar has put him in charge of that area, to be governor of that area, is to make sure that no one rises up to be a threat against Caesar, which pronouncing yourself as a king that Caesar hasn't appointed king would be insurrection in that. So he says, are you a king? And what does Jesus say? Yes or no? You said correctly, I am a king. But what? What does he explain? My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight. But that my kingdom is not from here. And so Pilate now understands, okay, so you're not talking about any type of physical kingdom that would be any threat to Caesar. And so he comes out and he tells the Jews, I find no fault in it. So your charges don't hold up. First of all, I don't care if he's stirring up the people about some question in your law. And as far as taxes go, there were no witnesses that were saying that other than the bold accusation of that. And number three, about the king, this is not the type of kingdom that's going to be a threat. So he comes out and tells the people that. Now, listen to what the people say here. We're looking in Luke chapter 23, and hold on, I just completely lost my place here. Where did I say we were going to start? 5? Yes, that's exactly where we're going to start. Verse 5. Would you read just verse 5, and then we'll make a comment about it.
But they were the more fierce, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is this a true statement? Is Jesus stirring up the people? I see some shaking their head yes, some shaking their head no. Those shaking their head yes, please explain what you are thinking. Okay, so there are people that are upset, all right? Half are following him. Is he making waves? Yes, he is. How is he making waves? He's contradicting the Jewish leaders what? Okay, he has. That is true. What is that? How did they say he's doing it? His teaching. Teaching. And let me tell you, that is the way that God has always stirred up people, is by teaching. Now, Colby mentioned that Jesus performed miracles. The apostles performed miracles. Do we see the disciples continue to perform miracles after the days of the apostles? But do God's people still stir up people? How do they do it? Were you stirred up by teaching? If you are a Christian, you are. That's how you became a Christian. You heard the teaching of God's word, and it convicted you of something enough that you were upset enough that said, I've got to make a change. And you made a the biggest change you can make. Such a big change that you became a different person. You were born again because of that teaching. And so we see here their accusation on this point from that standpoint is true. Now, what they're saying is he's creating an unstable environment, something that would create insurrection against Caesar. That was not true. Actually, he was telling them to submit to Caesar. But the statement that they make there at face value, he stirs up the people teaching, is true. Is true. Any thoughts on verse 5 before we move on? Now, I don't think that Pilate was as interested in that facet as we are. Pilate latched on to one word there. What was the one word that he latched on to? Galilee. Jesus is from Galilee. Okay, how does Pilate feel about Jesus at this point? What do we know he thinks about Jesus? He thinks he's an innocent man. He thinks he's an innocent man. And yet they want something done about him. He thinks that he's innocent. And so now he's looking for some way where he doesn't have to be responsible about this. So he hears that he's from Galilee. Well, his jurisdiction is not Galilee. His jurisdiction is Judea. Whose jurisdiction is Galilee? Herod, King Herod. So let's read verses 6 through 12.
When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a glorious robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other.
All right, so Herod is not ignorant of Jesus. He's heard about Jesus. He's heard about the miracles that he's been performing. How close has Herod gotten to Jesus? I don't know. That's a great question. Maybe you can read my mind what I'm looking for there. What connection would Herod have with Jesus? The closest connection, at least, that we see in the scripture. John the Baptist. Thank you. Good job reading my mind, because I did not ask that well. John the Baptist. So you remember that Herod had had John arrested. John had condemned Herod for his unlawful marriage to Herodias, and therefore Herod had him arrested. But he viewed John as a prophet, and he would go and call for John and listen to John teach. Now, he never really responded to John's teaching in the right way, but he had a respect for John in that. And now he has an opportunity to hear Jesus, and so he's excited about that. And so he calls for Jesus, and what does he do? What does Herod do? He questions it. And I'd love to know some of the questions that he's asking. But what about this? What about this? Did you really do this? Was that person really dead? I heard about this. Is this true? I don't know what all the questions were. How does Jesus respond to those questions? Nothing. Gives him nothing. How rude not to answer the king in any way. I'm interested in why you think Jesus responded without a word. What do you know about Herod? How do you know he doesn't want the truth?
Because John the Baptist condemned his unlawful marriage.
And Herod had multiple opportunities to hear the truth from John, not just that one, but others as well. Very good. And he did not. He did not. This tells me something here. Jesus did not feel obligated to give Herod another opportunity to hear the truth, because it had already been proven where his heart was. He was curious about things. He was curious about John enough that he would call for John several times, but not willing. He didn't love the truth to respond to it. And so Jesus has nothing to say to it. And so he asks questions, and Jesus gives him nothing in that. Any thoughts on that? By the way, there are others there that are excited to answer these questions. Who are the others that are excited to answer the questions? Verse 10. The Jews are there and they're accusing him the whole way. So they're making sure that their case is known, but Jesus doesn't respond. So, verse 11, Herod and his men of war treated Jesus with contempt. They mocked him and they arrayed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. So this is at least the second time that we've seen Jesus badly mistreated. In other words, we saw that the Jews at the Sanhedrin slapping him, spitting on him, blindfolding him, say, prophesy to us. And now we see Herod's men of war, his soldiers, these would be probably Jewish soldiers, that are mocking him and putting him in some gorgeous robe and treating him with contempt. And then it tells us one other thing about Herod and Pilate. What's their relationship been like previous to this? They didn't get along very well. Yes, sir.
Luke 13:31, is this the same area that's mentioned there? We're talking about
In Luke 13:31, what's the context there? You'll have to help me. Yes, I believe it is. I think it is, yes. I believe it is the same Herod. Yeah, which is a great point to make because we already see kind of what his, at least what everybody thought that Herod felt, and I think that's right. Good point.
It seems like Herod wanted to be entertained.
Yeah.
He wanted to see a miracle.
That is right. And on this day, because of this interaction, Herod and Pilate, their relationship changed, and they became friends from thereafter. So it's interesting that this is what brought them together on that. So this is kind of, we will read about Herod later on, and I'm not sure it's the same Herod. There's so many Herods in the New Testament because everybody in that family, the Herodian family, took on that name. And so we have to distinguish which one, but I'm pretty sure that this is the same one that was seeking Jesus earlier. Any other thoughts through this section? Yes.
It's interesting that Pilate and Herod says that we're at enmity to one another. When Pilate's questioning Jesus, he may have been thinking about this might be somebody I can get along with better. He's asking if he's the king, he finds no fault with him. And so he may have been looking at a physical king, somebody better than Herod. Of course, makes sense of Herod's jurisdiction. And,
Yeah.
they become tied after that.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought. Yeah. Very good.
Can you explain why Herod was in Jerusalem at that time? I mean, it was the Passover. And,
Yes. And so Herod did have a palace there in Jerusalem as well. And so I think he would frequent that often, but it is the Passover feast. And the Herodian family, even though their lineage was actually Edomite rather than Jewish, they had converted. They were proselytes to Judaism. But the main reason, at least from what we can tell from history, the main reason they proselyted was because Rome was willing to make them in a position of leadership there. And so but in order to lead the people in a way that the people would accept their leadership, they had to become Jews to do so. So there's no evidence that any in the Herod family ever were very devoted Jews, but they were converted to Judaism more for political reasons than anything else. And so he probably would have followed the customs and been in Jerusalem for the feast if for no other reason. All right. So, does Herod condemn him? No, mocks him. And Pilate, has Pilate condemned him? All right. So can the Jews put him to death? No. So Pilate, verse 13, I'll tell you what, I'm sorry, 13 through 16 in Luke 23.
Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him."
Okay, so how do you think this is going to sit with the people? That's not the answer they wanted to hear. Let's flip over to Matthew's account, Matthew 27 and verse 15, because we'll see if you. I think so. I think so. It's to appease them. In other words, they brought him. They're not going to be happy. He's thinking, all right, he's done nothing worthy of death. If you think he's been a troublemaker, I'll slap him on the wrist, send him on. And when I say slap on the wrist, he did not have in mind a slap on the wrist, but he had in mind something less than death, and that's what they're asking for here. So they're still not content with that. All right, Matthew 27, starting in verse 15. Let's take verse 15 through 20. Let's just break it up like that.
Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. While he was sitting at the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that man, that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus.
Okay, so in Mark's account, it seems that because the people are insisting that something be done to Jesus, that Pilate kind of brings this out, and the people jump on it as well. I think what Pilate is thinking is, we've got this custom of releasing one prisoner. And if I understand this correctly, and I may be wrong about this, it was basically that you see this go on in the Middle East a lot. Matter of fact, Hamas and Israel right now, I understand that Hamas just agreed to release the last hostage that they had. And you'll see this sometimes where it's like, okay, we will release these prisoner of war people or whatever. So what the Jews would typically do is someone that they didn't think deserved to be imprisoned by the Romans, they would ask for, and the Romans on this feast, to appease them, would release one that they wanted granted. They usually didn't ask for the release of someone they felt was guilty. They asked for the release of someone that they had sympathy for. So Pilate is thinking here, all right, I don't want Jesus to be put to death because he hasn't done anything worthy of death. What I'm going to do is I'm going to present two options for them. One, Jesus, who basically hasn't done anything. The other, Barabbas. What's Barabbas done? Anybody know? Murder. He's led an insurrection. He's a murderer. This guy, and he's led a group of murderers. And so everybody knows he's guilty on this. Rome wants him dead. They want him dead. So here's a situation where you got one, and it says, because he knew that for envy's sake they delivered Jesus up. So here's a guy that you envy but is innocent. Here's a guy that we all know is guilty and dangerous. Which one do you want me to release? Now, this is a no-brainer. And Pilate is assuming that they're going to say, well, if that's the only choice that we have, I guess release Jesus, because we sure don't want to release Barabbas. Now, there's one other. We're going to get to the conclusion of that in a second. But what other really interesting event happens about this time? It's recorded right here. Pilate's wife has this weird dream, or has had this weird dream about Jesus and about what? His innocence. Have nothing to do with this just man. I've suffered many things in a dream. He's innocent in this. Austin, were you the one that asked me about this? Somebody just recently asked me, why would God send dreams to his wife on this occasion? In other words, why does he give Pilate so many opportunities to know that Jesus is innocent here? Anybody have thoughts on that? Maybe. It's certainly an opportunity, isn't it? It's certainly an opportunity to. for them to see the evidence and become followers. It does seem that God is giving every opportunity for everyone here to see that this is the innocent Lamb of God that is being led as a sheep to the slaughter, as opposed to some type of criminal. And so the Jews know that he's not done it. The leadership of the Jews, they've set up false witnesses. They've hired Judas to entrap him or find a way to deliver him over to them. They know they have not acted properly in all of this. So no evidence is needed there. Pilate doesn't have all of that information, although he knows this for envy's sake. But now it's almost as if God is giving him the information saying, he's innocent. He's innocent. So it's very interesting that happens right here. And I think Matthew's the only one who records that for us. Any other thoughts through verse 20?
The chief priest and elders, they may have been thinking something like this might happen, do you think? And so they have planned to make sure that Jesus is not released.
Yeah.
No matter what.
That's right. Yeah, I think his Mark or Luke's account says that they're going to stir up the people in this. So they accuse Jesus of stirring up the people, but they're really the ones that are stirring up the people to do wrong, all this. Let's pick up in verse 21 and go ahead and read through 26. Through 23. We're going to stop at 23.
The governor answered and said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" They said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said to him, "Let him be crucified." Then the governor said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they cried out all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified."
Okay. So he's done nothing worthy of death. You got Barabbas here who has done something worthy of death. And which one do you want me to release? Well, release the one that hasn't done anything worthy. Release the one that has done something worthy of death. And what do you want me to do with the other one? Kill him. And not just kill him, but crucify him. And still today, we'll use that terminology in some way. They crucified him. And what we mean by that is they really put him through it. And that's what crucifixion was designed to do. It was designed to be a slow, humiliating, torturous death. That was the idea of it. So the Romans got together and they thought, if we wanted to really punish somebody in the worst way, what's the worst way we could do it? Crucifixion was their answer to that. And that's what the Jews call for here, is make it as painful and as slow as possible for him and let him die that way. Now, the chief priests and the scribes have stirred up the people to say this, but the people have bought into it and followed in, and now here they are. And by the way, I think that probably some of these may have been some of the very same ones who just a few days before were saying, "Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." And now at the chief priest urging, they're calling for his head. Let him be crucified. Interesting little note here. I don't know how much to make of this, but it's interesting to think about. Anybody know what the name Barabbas means? Son of the Father. Son of the Father. Who was the Son of the Father here? Jesus was the true Son of the Father. But Barabbas is going to get what Jesus should have deserved, and that is to be released. And Jesus is going to get what Barabbas deserved and what we deserved. Any other thoughts through verse 23?
Well, I think what's interesting is all this human stuff's going on, but all this was ordained, all this was predicted, all this was forever.
Yeah.
And so it was inevitable.
Yes.
That's the interesting part. The rest of it was just window dressing.
Yeah. So here you have all of, you said the human part of it. I like the way you said, here's all of these emotions that are involved. Here are the things that are driving these decisions. And yet this outcome has been designed from the beginning, that it was coming to this. And so here's one of those places where we see humans playing right into God's plan and carrying out God's plan, even unintentionally. And that, very good. Very good. All right, let's go back over to John's account because we've got some things to fit in here. John 19. Hold on. Maybe I want to go to Mark first. Give me just a second here. Yes. Yeah. So Anna asked, would it not be Satan also following into God's plan? I definitely do not think that Satan's intention here was, hey, I'm going to carry out a plan that will destroy me. I think what Satan thinks is, this is my opportunity. And yet, what is the expression that people say sometimes? They're playing checkers while somebody else is playing chess. And I think that's what's happening here. God's playing chess and Satan's playing checkers. He's not even in the same, on the same level at all. But he thinks, I'm winning at this. And he's not. All right, hold on one second. Let me make sure I've got my bearings here on something. Yeah, let's go to Mark. I'm not exactly sure which order this falls in, so we'll cover Mark's account first. Mark 15, verse 16 through 19. Let's do that first.
Then the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium, and they called together the whole garrison. And they clothed him with purple, and they twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and began to salute him. Hail, King of the Jews! Then they struck him on the head with a reed and spat on him, and bowing the knee, they worshipped him. And when they had mocked him, they took the purple off him, put on his own clothes, and led him out to crucify him.
Okay, so this is the third time we've seen this type of behavior. Once by the Jews in the Sanhedrin, once by Herod's men of war, and now by the Roman garrison under Pilate. And the mockings that take place here in this, and everything about this. So we talk about that Jesus was tempted in all ways as we are, yet without sin. And I think that, we think about the temptation in the wilderness when Satan comes and tempts him for 40 days. That was just one glimpse. And here we have the things that, how often have you lost your temper in your life? How often have you reacted to somebody mistreating you by avenging yourself and retaliating? Here is Jesus repeatedly being subjected to that type of wrong, and yet perfect self-control through it.
In some of the situations you're talking about, we don't have the power to do anything about what's being done to us, but he had all power.
Yes.
And still restrained himself.
That's right. That is right. Now, there's something else that takes place here in John 19 and verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. I'm not sure if the scourging took place before the mocking of the soldiers or after. It seems to be right there together. In John's account, it sounds like the scourging takes place first, and then the soldiers do that, and that makes sense as well. And it seems that Pilate now is using a different tactic. What do the people want? They want blood. All right. Pilate doesn't want to see him put to death. So Pilate seems to subject him here to the scourging. By the way, can somebody describe scourging to me? You don't have to go into too much detail, but enough that we get an idea. That's the whipping part. That's the whipping part. Scourging often led to death. It was not like a caning. A caning bruises real bad. The Jews would beat somebody with a cane, 40 stripes minus one, which would be incredibly painful, but usually not life-threatening. But the Romans, when they scourged, they would take a whip that would have bits of metal and bone in it, and the idea was to stick it in and to rip the flesh. So it wasn't just the stinging of it. They wanted to tear up the flesh. And that's the reason why people died a lot of times, is because they bled to death. And there's descriptions of if it came around on the backside where the rib cage wouldn't protect, it would actually rip open the body cavity so that entrails and things could be exposed. And so it was a brutal process. So he has Jesus scourged. He has this crown of thorns, or at least they took the crown of thorns and placed it on him. And it is in this state that he brings Jesus back out to the people again. So let's pick up in verse chapter 19, John chapter 19, and let's just read verses 1 through 4 there together. I know we've already covered that. John 19, verses 1 through 4.
So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him."
Okay. He brings him back out to them. This is the artist's rendition of it, but I don't think it's probably far from the truth. People, the condition a man is in after a scourging is not a great condition to look at. He brings him back out. In the other accounts, he says, "Behold the man." In other words, here's your king. What do you think Pilate's trying to do? Make a mockery of their accusations. What do they want? They want blood. What has he given them? If you saw this man, no matter what you thought about him, you saw any man come out in the condition that we assume Jesus would have come out in, what would you feel? You'd feel pity. You'd feel pity. And I think that's what Pilate's trying to do here. Pilate does not want to put him to death. He's been warned by his wife. He doesn't think that he's guilty, and yet they are calling for it. And he's tried Barabbas. That didn't work. I think what he's trying to do now is saying, "All right, look, I'll teach him a lesson and bring him back out." And I think he's expecting that when he brings them before the people this time, that they will have some compassion and pity and say, "All right, that's enough. That's enough." And so he brings them back out again. So let's pick up reading in verse 5 and verse 7, 5 through 7.
Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to him, "Behold the man." To them, "Behold the man." Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God."
All right. So what's their response? No pity, no pity. Crucify him, crucify him, kill him. What was their accusation? What had Jesus done? He made himself the Son of God. Well, how does Pilate feel? Yeah, I don't want anything to do with this. You kill him. Nope, we can't do it, but he has to die. Now, Pilate's in a position here because Pilate's job is to keep peace in this area. And these people are getting more and more stirred up. So he's in a pickle because he feels like he should uphold justice here, but at the same time, the pressure's being applied by the people, and he does want to appease the people if at all possible. And I think that's what he's trying to do here. But then this statement is, he made himself the Son of God. Are you a king? It is as you say, for this purpose I came. But my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. He's already told him that. And everyone who hears my voice comes to the truth. And Pilate was somewhat cynical. What is truth? Now he's the Son of God, and my wife's having dreams about have nothing to do with this just man. You see the pressure being applied from both sides on Pilate here. So Pilate calls him back in. Let's pick up in verse 8 and read through verse 11. Yes. Okay.
Thorns, and if you look up drawings from back then, you'll see it's a helmet.
Okay.
And then when you think about passages, the helmet of salvation and those things, then also too that the scholars say that behold the man really means he was disfigured. You couldn't recognize him because he was beaten so bad.
Yeah.
And then they wanted him to die on the cross because they
wanted to stain and ruin his reputation for life. Because only criminals died on the cross.
Right.
They could have killed Christ at Nazareth. They looking to throw him down the hill, break his neck. Other times they picked up stones to stone him. They wanted to ruin his reputation from now on. And that's what the cross does. When you think about the cross in their day and time, they're criminals. You know, he must have been a criminal when he died.
Sure.
So
That's right.
That's kind of what's happening.
That's a good point. So I do want to, I want to piggyback off of what you were talking about on the cross there, that public humiliation. That's what the Romans intended it to do. By the way, when you see a depiction of Jesus on the cross, he almost always has on some type of, towel wrapped around him or something like that. Typically, they were crucified nude. In other words, they wanted to be as shameful as possible. Here's a man in his worst state with nothing to cover, and they wanted to shame him as much as possible. It was a very public execution. They would hang there for days usually. That was the point of it. But the law said something about someone. What did the law say about someone who died on a tree? It was cursed, all right? It was cursed. And so Mike makes the point about how the Jews wanted him to die this way because it would forever imprint on the people's mind that this was a disgraceful man, a criminal of some type. But the law itself had predicted something about cursed be the man who hangs on a tree. And Jesus was fulfilling that curse. He was becoming a curse for us in that. And so you have, going back to what Terry said earlier, you have the human side of this bloodthirstiness saying, well, this is how we want him to die. And yet we have God fulfilling his purpose in Jesus becoming a curse for us in that as well. And so those are merging together in the type of death that Jesus would die here. Anybody else have anything before we move forward? Okay, verse 8 through 11.
Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again to the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you?" Jesus answered, "You could have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin."
Oh, this is such a powerful, rich moment right here. So Pilate is afraid. Pilate is afraid there's something to this Jesus. And so he calls him back in again, and he says, "Where are you from? Where are you from? You said that you came here for this purpose, to have a spiritual kingdom. You're making the claim that you are the Son of God. I want you to tell me, where are you from? Tell me more." And Jesus doesn't respond. So a lot of the things that Jesus is doing here, do you think Jesus at this point could have convinced Pilate that he was the Son of God and Pilate needed to let him go? You don't think so? All right. I don't. Does he try to? He doesn't try to. Why doesn't he try to? That's the reason he came. And so what I want you to do in Jesus' statements is I want you to see that Jesus is walking this line of doing his Father's will, of not being dishonest, but doing his Father's will. The decision was made in the garden, what was going to happen. I mean, it was made before that, but I'm talking about the wrestling with this that Jesus had was in the garden. And when the answer was, no, you're going to have to drink this cup, Jesus fully accepts it. And now in situations where you would think, Jesus has an opportunity right now to plead for his life before the man who could grant him his life. And he does not. And maybe the reason he does not is because he knows, oh, I have to die. And but I love this statement. So Pilate's a little confused by this. Why is he not saying anything? He says, "Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you or the power to release you?" Pilate is the Jews are having to come to Pilate for permission. Rome has given him the most authority of anybody in that area, except for one man. Who's that? Jesus. And Jesus' statement here makes it known. No. No, you wouldn't have any power at all unless it was given to you from above. And basically what Jesus is saying is, it's not by your authority that this is happening. I'm not going to the cross because you condemn me to go to the cross. I'm going to the cross because the Father's will was for me to go to the cross. And then Jesus makes this statement that I do think is interesting. He says, therefore the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. The greater sin. Do you think that Pilate is innocent by sending Jesus to the cross? Because Pilate knows he's innocent. And what is Pilate's job to do? What's he supposed to do? What's any judge supposed to do? Uphold the law. Uphold what's right and just. And here, Pilate's teetering on not doing that because of the pressure of the people. So he bears some responsibility. But Jesus makes it known here, I know that you're not the one that instigated this. I know you're not the one pushing for this. It's my own people, God's special people that are doing this. Just as the prophecy, just as as was prophesied, the Jews are the ones that are primarily responsible for this.
Well, it's almost like Pilate is willing to let him go here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, at this very moment right here, he's just looking for a reason.
Yes. Anything. And trying different options to see if he can do something. All right, any other thoughts through verse 11?
Jesus could see his heart.
Yeah.
He knows if he could or couldn't get out of the situation, and he didn't say it.
Yeah, that's right.
That kind of shows a little.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Okay, let's take verse 12 through let's just take 12 through 16.
From then on, Pilate saw.
Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I just looked at the clock when you started reading. We're going to stop right there. That gives us a good stopping place, and we would not have time to cover that. I'm sorry to do that to you. Thank you. Any other final statement, comment?
You know, this is a radical thought, but it just occurred to me that, you know, Pilate obviously, like Kobe said, he wanted to let him go. And I believe, and this is just my theory, that if he had followed his conscience and done what he wanted to do, ultimately, they would have just fired him and found someone that would have done it.
Yeah.
At the end would have always been the same. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I never thought of that until just this moment.
So
What would have happened?
hold that thought, because what you just discovered right there, in that point, is what we see all the way through the Bible. God's purposes will be accomplished. The question is, what side will you fall on in doing that? Someone else may do it and be guilty of it. You don't have to be. Someone else may do what's right, and you may do what's wrong. Each of us has a choice in that, but yet God's purposes will still be accomplished. Deep thought there. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact